guys, how's everybody doing? Good to see you this week. It's I think this is week number 7 doing these things. So anyway, been having a lot of fun. We're back outside today. It's a beautiful day again. Little windy, but it's warm. It's finally going to get warm, so we're looking forward to that. I tell you what, if you watched the last video, you remember we ended it. I gave you an assignment. I gave you a memory verse, so hopefully you worked on your verse. Well, we did have a family that did. So the Lowery family took a video of themselves saying the verse, John 1. The verse that I gave you was John 1, 1 through 3. They did John 1, 1 through 5. So let's take a listen and say along with them. Here we go.
He was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1, 1 through 5.
Good job, Lowery clan. I tell you what, did anybody see Ian? I didn't see Ian in that video. I'm just kidding, Ian. We saw you wearing that camo. Hey man, I like the hat. That was quite the crease. I could tell you do not like a flat brim hat. Way to go. And I also could tell the way you wear that camo, one of these days you're going to be a really good hunter. I can just tell it. So anyway, thanks for sending that in, and hopefully you were the rest of you were able to work on that verse at home this week. At the end of the video, I'll give you the verse for this week that you can memorize with your family or yourself or with your parents until the next video. So you know, it's actually kind of interesting that the Lowery family sent me the video, because I can tell you, Mr. John sure has been anxious to be part of the video and tell everybody hello. You know, he just cannot wait to say hello, and he really misses all the kids. You know, he does have a heart for kids. I mean, after all, he's got 5 of them, so he better. But, you know, many of you probably don't know this. Maybe you do. But I actually grew up with Mr. John. And I'm talking about Mr. John Lowery. We've got a lot of Mr. Johns in the church, so I guess for the purposes of this video, we'll call him Mr. J-Lo for Mr. John Lowery. We'll call him Mr. J-Lo. So Mr. J-Lo, him and his family came to our church when I was little. And I actually knew Miss Sarah before that. Her and I grew up together from the time we were both babies. But I guess Mr. John must have done something right to catch her eye. I'm not sure. But anyway, he wanted me to tell you a little bit about him. Now, you all know he's a police officer, so we'll save that. But some of you may not have known that he graduated from seminary. He got his seminary degree. A seminary is where pastors go to learn deeper in the Word so that they can preach and be involved with the ministry. So, in case you don't believe me, I have a picture of Mr. John when he graduated from seminary. So here it is. He looks pretty good in that gown. You know, some might say he's smarter than he looks, and that's probably right. There's not much to go on there. So he looks pretty smart. He's intellectual. So we thank you, Mr. John, for taking the time to study the Word so that you can help Pastor Brian out and help our church when you fill in the pulpit. That's a real ministry to everybody. You know, now the good part, Mr. John, you know, he's a police officer. And it's really not surprising to me, because as a kid, I think Mr. John knew a lot of police officers. He was one of those kids that just seemed to always get in trouble. So, you know, there was a lot of police officers that came along to help him along the way. So we're glad to see that he finally turned out halfway decent. But Mr. John wanted you to see a picture of him the day that he graduated from the academy. So here's Mr. J-Lo, the day that he graduated from the police academy. Not a bad looking guy. You know, I tell you what, with all these pictures that we put in these videos, these people seem so familiar. But, hey, I guess it is what it is. And you know, we're real serious on this channel, real serious with these videos, and you know, I just thought let's take a minute here and be funny. So let's think about what Mr. John may look like in 20 or so years when he retires. You know, right now, he's a sergeant. He got a promotion a little while ago, and he's Sergeant J-Lo. That's what we call him. But, you know, maybe by the time he retires, he'll be the sheriff. So let's just pretend for a moment this is what Mr. J-Lo may look like in 20 years. Obviously, we're having fun, but in all seriousness, Mr. John, thank you for your service. Thank you for protecting us. He works for the county of Henrico, and he's in the front lines right now during all of this coronavirus stuff. So on behalf of all of the kids and all of the church, we want to say thank you for your service. So let's go ahead and get into our lesson for today. Today we're going to talk about a story where Jesus heals another person. And it's going to be a story about faith. And the story is about a centurion. And it comes from Luke chapter 7, verses 1 through 10. Now this story is also found in Matthew, but I've decided to read this passage out of Luke today. So again, Luke chapter 7, verses 1 through 10. After he had finished all his sayings in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. Now a centurion had a servant who was sick and at the point of death, who was highly valued by him. When the centurion heard about Jesus, he sent to him elders of the Jews, asking him to come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they pleaded with him earnestly, saying, "He is worthy to have you do this for him, for he loves our nation, and he is the one who built our synagogue." And Jesus went with them. When he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends, saying to him, "Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. Therefore, I do not presume to come to you. But say the word, and let my servant be healed. For I too am a man set under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes. And to my servant, do this, and he does it." When Jesus heard these things, he marveled at him, and turning to the crowd that followed him, said, "I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith." And when those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the servant well. So that's the passage from Luke. So now we'll take a second here and kind of summarize what the story is telling us about here, and then we're going to spend the majority of our time talking about faith. So, as with most of these stories, I'm sure a lot of you have already heard these, and I'm sure some of you haven't. I'm sure a lot of you may know what a centurion is, and some of you may not. But a centurion was a Roman soldier, and a centurion was a soldier that had status, kind of like a sergeant, like Mr. J-Lo. He's a sergeant, so he has people under him. A centurion had 100 soldiers that were underneath him. So the centurion was the boss of 100 different men, 100 different Roman soldiers. Well, this guy, as the passage tells us, he had a servant who was very sick. And based on what we read, it doesn't appear that this centurion had ever met Jesus. But in verse 3, it said that he heard about Jesus. So as we've been talking about in the past several videos, you know that Jesus has been going around doing a lot of miracles, and his popularity was starting to build. And I would imagine that the centurion probably heard about the miracles and about him, and based on the context, he probably may have known that this was the Messiah. So when the centurion heard, or when the centurion's servant got sick, he asked the Jewish leaders, the Jewish elders, if they could go on his behalf and ask Jesus to heal the servant. So, thinking about the context of the Romans and the Jews, you know, there were a lot of Roman soldiers that didn't treat the Jewish people very well. But here we have an exception to the rule, because the Jewish leaders, the Jewish elders, when they went and found Jesus, they said to him, "He is worthy to have you do this for him, for he loves our nation, and he is the one who built our synagogue." So he was obviously a friend to the Jewish people. And here we have an example of how a group of people love somebody else. We've been talking about how we're supposed to love God and love our neighbor. Here we have an example of the Jewish elders loving on the centurion, because when the centurion asked them to go get Jesus and tell him about the servant, they did it. And then they went and found Jesus, told him what was going on. So Jesus goes to the centurion's house, and before he gets there, the centurion meets him outside somewhere and says, Jesus, I'm not worthy for you to come to my house. So Jesus, at that point, based on what we could tell, he saw the faith that the centurion had. Especially when the centurion said, "Just say the word and heal my servant. You don't need to come in and see him." And so the centurion had faith. And you know what, I was thinking, what's a good way to explain faith? You know, when it really comes down to it, faith is when we believe in something. But in this case, faith is believing in something that we can't see. Like, for example, I have faith that when I take a breath, I'm going to breathe in air because I know it's there, but I can't see it unless it's really, really foggy or dirty. But right now it's pretty clear and I can't see any air. Well, I have another way, and I had some help on this. I want to show you an example of faith. So I'm going to ask my YouTube assistant to insert that right here. Hey there, young fella. How are you?
Good.
Tell everybody your name.
Nathan.
And who am I?
Mr. Ginger Chops.
Who am I really?
Dad.
Dad. All right, I just want to make sure everybody knew that this is Nathan, and he's not a robot. So Nathan, raise your right hand. All right, now you know it's not a robot. So Nathan, tell everybody the instructions that I gave you before we got started. What am I going to do?
Put a blindfold on me, and I have to follow what you say.
Okay, so I've told Nathan all he knows is that he's going to be blindfolded, and he has to trust that what I'm telling him is going to be right, and that he's not going to get hurt. Okay? You trust me that you won't get hurt?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's put this on. How many fingers am I holding up?
I don't know because I'm blind.
Are you sure?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Now, take 2 steps backwards. Turn around. Jump up and down 4 times. Now jump up and down 6 more times. Now, take 2 steps backwards. Now, sit down like you're sitting in a chair. Now, spin around. So, before we started, did you know that bucket was going to be there?
No.
No? Were you surprised and it felt good to not hit the ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, did you trust me and did you have faith that I wasn't going to let you get hurt?
Yeah, but the bucket is a little pokey.
Oh, the bucket's a little pokey? Well, he didn't hit the ground, so he had faith that I wasn't going to let him get hurt. So, Nathan, thank you for helping us out with that lesson. Good job. So thank you, Nathan, for helping us out with that. And if you saw from that video that we did separately from this one, Nathan had faith that I wasn't going to let him fall to the ground. But in that faith, Nathan didn't know that I was going to put that bucket under him. He had faith that even though I told him to sit down, he thought that, hey, I might hit the ground. But I was there with the bucket, and he didn't get hurt because he was blindfolded. He couldn't see that I put that bucket underneath of him. But he had faith and trust in me as his dad that I was going to be able to keep him from hitting the ground. So the centurion in this story had faith in Jesus, who he had only heard about, and he hadn't really seen, but he had heard that Jesus performed miracles. And so Jesus says to the centurion, he says to the people that are around, I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith. Which is basically what he's saying is, to the Jewish people, this Roman soldier has more faith in me than you do. So this is an amazing example of how Jesus reaches out to those who have faith in him. And even now today, when we can't see him, he's not around, we have the stories of Jesus and what he did. And we have the stories of other people whose lives have affected him. And we have people like Mr. J-Lo, who went to seminary to learn in depth the scriptures so that they could teach us what faith is like. So, as always, I pray that the story and the words, you understand that. As always, if you have any questions, I know many of your parents watch this along with you, so ask them questions. If you want to ask me any questions, just let your parents know and they can reach out to me. I would really love to hear from you. So thank you for listening into that today. Before we go, though, I've got to give you your homework assignment for next week. So the verse for next week is going to be John chapter 15, verses 12 through 14. So let me read that real quick for you. And this week I got smart. I'm not going to go off of pieces of paper in there because last week that got me in trouble. So John, make sure I got the right verse. John chapter 15, verses 12 through 14. And that says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you." So next week, hopefully we'll have another family come on and say it. So work on that with your family this week and be ready to say it again next week. And I think we have another guest next week who's really, really anxious to come in and say hello to everybody. So look forward to that as well. As always, tell your mom you love her. Give your dad a big fist bump. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.